Hello, welcome to Just the Discs. We talk about Blu-rays here. I am talking about three different discs today. One from Arrow, one from Blue Underground, and one from The Film Detective. I'm going to start with Arrow's new Blu-ray of Edge of Sanity. This is from 1989. Previously released in the States as part of a double bill from Scream Factory, Bare Bones, with the film Destroyer. So I have seen it. I remembered being maybe lukewarmish on it, but I don't know, I must have been in a weird mood at the time because it's got a lot going for it, and I definitely enjoyed this rewatch with this new transfer, which is a brand new 2K restoration from a 4K scan of the original 35mm camera negative by Arrow, and it looks very nice. Like I said, a lot going for this. It is a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story. It is also a Jack the Ripper story. So it's kind of mashing up those two ideas. And it stars Anthony Perkins as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the Ripper, whatever you want to call him. And I think, if I'm pitching it to anybody and you're a fan of Anthony Perkins and those kinds of stories, I think this will be up your alley. It's directed by a French director named Gerard Kikoin, who I'll talk about later when I get into the special features a little bit more. But it's just a really interesting, set in London, the late 1800s, and it opens with a bizarre dream sequence with a young kid sneaking into a barn, seeing this woman getting undressed, sort of being sexy. He's up in the loft area of the barn, and then a man comes in and they start to have sex, and he's sort of watching them, and then she's sort of looking at him and ultimately sort of teasing him. And then we see him fall a little bit and get tangled in a chain at the top of the loft, and then the guy gets up and just starts spanking him on the butt, and then Anthony Perkins wakes up, and we see him, in his bed with his wife. He's Dr. Jekyll, and we see him, go to his lab eventually, and he's doing experiments with cocaine and ether, and so it's one of those things where we see him feeding a monkey cocaine, and then the monkey spills ether on the cocaine, and it's kind of a peanut butter cup situation, chocolate in my peanut butter. And then the ether makes this gas, and he inhales the gas, and that turns him into Mr. Hyde. And so that's a really interesting sort of villain origin story, if you will, I guess. And it's just an intriguing open. And it's a very stylish film. It's very stylishly shot. And we'll see Mr. Hyde likes the nightlife, so when he's in that Mr. Hyde mode, he'll sort of go out into London and see, we'll see him turn a corner, and suddenly the lights are like this crazy, vibrant red, like, neon almost, and he's in a club called Madame Flora's that looks like something out of the 1980s or something out of Eyes Wide Shut. It's this bright red, sexy club. And, so it's got a weird sort of, set in a period but out of time feeling. And it's obviously not a whodunit. We know who did it. We know who the killer is. We know kind of where he goes. He starts to go after some prostitutes and then, starts killing them. And it's a really intriguing dual role for Anthony Perkins if you're a fan of him, and I'm definitely a fan of him. A lot of his stuff beyond Psycho, Pretty Poison, The Tall Story is a really interesting one. Played as It Lays. He's done a lot of great dramatic work, and so this is just an example that I guess people would say would be more along the lines of the Norman from Psycho, Norman Bates kind of character, but it's different. It's definitely him doing something different and doing a couple different things. So I dig that. It's a nice disc in terms of the features. We have a brand new audio commentary with David Flint and author and filmmaker Sean Hogan. very informative and sort of a just sort of looking at the film itself, talking about films along those lines, talking about production things, etc. It's a thorough and enjoyable track. We have a bunch of interviews here. We have French Love, which is an interview with director Gerard Kikoin, conducted in 2020. We have a couple different interviews with him from that period that are maybe from another release. I don't know. But this one is about 21 minutes. It's in French. He speaks French. It's subtitled. More of a general career retro sort of interview. He talks about his dad having a dubbing studio, which dubbed films into French and English because the Americans bought films in Europe and then had to dub them for French television, and how he mentioned working from like 64 to 71 on that stuff, and how he did Hammer films, things like Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde and Curse of Frankenstein and other stuff like that. So that was more his experience with horror. And then he would go on to do some sort of sexy adult films in France that he calls love films, and he definitely has a sort of considers them above regular X-rated films, and that he tried to give them style and more emotion than those kind of films in his mind. And so he's not ashamed of those at all. So he sort of talks about his past and his filmmaking and gets into some of the, working with Anthony Perkins on this film. But in the second interview we have with him, so that's 21 minutes. Then we have Staying Sane, which is another interview with Gerard Kikoin from 2020. That's about 24 minutes. And this one is also French with subtitles, more in depth with regards to Edge of Sanity, how he shot it, his memories of the production, how Anthony Perkins was with the other actors, how Anthony Perkins enjoyed the technical aspects of what they were doing and things like that. Then there's Edward's Edge, which is an interview with producer Edward Simons. That's about 12 minutes. That's a new interview in English. How he was approached by producer Harry Alan Towers to do this Jekyll and Hyde movie, and how they sort of wanted to do it differently than previous adaptations, because there have been a lot of them that do this story. And then sort of his memories of the film. That's an interesting interview. And then one called Over the Edge, Stephen Thrower on Edge of Sanity. And Stephen Thrower, of course, the author of Nightmare USA, dissects the film. And it's about 26 minutes. This is probably my favorite feature on this disc, just because I'm a huge Stephen Thrower fan. If you don't know his book, Nightmare USA, it's sort of a seminal text on exploitation cinema. And if you can get a hold of the hardcover book, it's gigantic, and you could hurt somebody with it. I'm a big fan of that book. It has a flamethrower guy on the cover from Don't Go in the House, and it's just a great book. So I love to hear he's like a Kim Newman type, where I love to hear his comments on films, and he has a lot of interesting things to say about this film. And this featurette has one of the warnings. The opinions expressed in this interview don't reflect the opinions of MGM, Arrow Video, etc. So there's some interesting takes in there, and I love that they, you'll see that at the beginning before the menu, but they don't always put it right before each feature. In this case, they're like, we're just reminding you these are his opinions, and so that's, I think, interesting. But yeah, just a great dissection of the film, talking about context and other horror films around the time. Good stuff. And then lastly, there's something called Jack, Jekyll, and Other Screen Psychos. That's 28 minutes, and that features Dr. Claire Smith, the author of Jack the Ripper in Film and Culture, talking about Edge of Sanity and the lineage of representations of Jack the Ripper in cinema. And also gets the views expressed in this or whatever before it, which is interesting. But she speaks to the real facts of the Ripper case and the victims and the real Jack the Ripper murder, and how the real killer was never caught. And so there's a lot of things we don't know about him. And she just talks about these other film adaptations and how they compare to the real evidence. It's a fascinating interview. I enjoyed it. So overall, a really nice new special edition of Edge of Sanity from Arrow Video. That's first. Next up, we have the Blue Underground disc. This is Uncle Sam, I Want You Dead. A little lenticular cover action there. This is a 4K Ultra HD disc of William Lustig's film from 1996. This film is scripted by the great Larry Cohen, who I'm a huge fan of, great filmmaker and great writer. And I gotta be honest, I had not seen this movie until this 4K. I had sort of had it sitting in my virtual queue for, since 1996. And I can tell you that I guess what happened was that I was working in a video store in that period, and we were getting a lot of sort of cheesy horror movies in around that time, straight-to-video stuff, which I believe this was straight-to-video. At least it's listed that way on IMDb. I don't know if it got a theatrical run or not. Shot on 35 and everything, but so I just remember we'd get movies in like Jack Frost or like The Ice Cream Man with Clint Howard, and they just looked like very cheesy, goofy horror films that at the time I was in college, I was studying film in school, and I probably thought I was above them. I don't know what my excuse was, but I know now I definitely do enjoy those films. And so for whatever reason, I saw Uncle Sam. I'm like, well, that's just silly. I'm not going to watch that. And I am disappointed because I'm disappointed that I didn't see it. Glad that I now finally did in this beautiful looking 4K, 235:1, beautiful looking, UHD image from Blue Underground. They have, as I've talked about on the channel, they do a great job with their 4Ks, and I love that William Lustig is getting all his stuff out in 4K, and it looks wonderful. So it was great to see it in this way as opposed to a cropped VHS tape as I would have seen it back then. But it's got a really fun cast, and I think at the time I might not have appreciated that as much, but I definitely do now, and the cast includes people like Isaac Hayes, Bo Hopkins, Timothy Bottoms, Robert Forster, PJ Soles, and William Smith. I mean, it's a really wonderful, eclectic cast. And it's just basically sort of a slasher movie, a 4th of July slasher movie. And it's really interesting to watch it 26 years later, and sort of the America we live in now versus what it was then. It's still very tongue-in-cheek and silly in a sense, but it just plays a little different, I think. It's a very anti-war movie and self-aware and sort of, like I said, cheeky in its way. It's about a soldier who is killed, named Sam. He's killed in a helicopter crash with some friendly fire. So he's killed by the United States military, and the copter crashes, and he's burned up in the crash, and somehow he survives, or he comes back to life, and his body is shipped home, and he comes out of the coffin and starts killing people, and it actually becomes kind of a Halloween type movie where Halloween is instead replaced by July 4th, because that is the day that he comes out of the coffin and he starts killing people. And he kills people that are, in any way un-American in his mind. He kills them for being corrupt, cheating on their taxes, smoking a joint at the 4th of July celebration, disrespecting the national anthem. He wears an Uncle Sam costume, basically a mask, and the whole costume bit that he steals from a kid who is apparently going to be in the 4th of July parade the next day, and uses the stilts in the costume to spy on some girl getting out of the shower, and then runs away. And then he kills that kid, cuts off the pants of the costume and steals it and puts it on, and then just starts wandering around the 4th of July celebration, killing people the next day. And he kills people in various ways with garden shears, burning them alive, running them up a flagpole, hanging style, blowing them up with fireworks, just lots of crazy stuff. And yeah, it's very Halloween in its way. It's a small town, sort of a, Norman Rockwell type town that Lustig found in California somewhere. And Isaac Hayes plays an ex-soldier who lost a leg in battle and now hates the military, hates the government and the wars. And there's this little kid who's the nephew of the soldier who died, who wants to be like him. And Isaac Hayes is basically saying, no, you don't, kid. And he's very much upset about it. He becomes kind of a Dr. Loomis type character in this movie, and I think that's very interesting. Bo Hopkins is a skeevy sergeant who shows up to deliver the body and is always trying to take advantage of grieving widows. Robert Forster is a corrupt congressman PJ Souls is the mother of a boy who was burned and blinded by fireworks. So it's a really interesting group. William Smith is a soldier that finds Sam's body at the beginning of the film. But yeah, I enjoyed it, and it definitely ends with a bang, a really explosive, crazy final sequence that I'm not going to go into, but they actually touch on in the special features. It's edited by Bob Murawski, who worked with Sam Raimi a lot, who runs Grindhouse Films, so it's well cut, and it even features a really great, and apparently not cheap, opening montage showing who Uncle Sam is over the years, and it just begins the movie this way, and it plays, the John Philip Sousa music, and it's lots of stock footage and little short films and bits that, in the commentary, Lustig says was not cheap to license. But it's a great, scene setter for who Uncle Sam is. It's really well cut and put together. It's like a little short film by Bob Murawski. So I love that Murawski worked on this, and it makes the movie better. And especially when you get to some of the really exciting stunt stuff, it's really well put together. And the movie's dedicated to Lucio Fulci, who had just died at the time. So it's a really fun one. There's one alternate artwork, and there is the other. So basically, two sides of that lenticular. You get either one that you want, and a little different. But in terms of features, this stuff is mostly, I think, from the previous releases, but it's good stuff. You have two commentary tracks. You have the first track with Bill Lustig, Larry Cohen, and producer George D. Braunstein, recorded in 2004, they note. And Lustig, says he was originally thinking of Billy Jack, a.k.a. Tom Laughlin, for the part of Isaac Hayes, but he couldn't get him. And then he came across Isaac Hayes in a casting book and was like, oh, well, yeah, that's a great option. And Isaac Hayes is great in the movie, by the way. I really loved him in this. One thing he mentions that I think is great advice is he says if you're working on a low-budget film, and this comes back to the casting stuff, he says definitely set aside a decent amount of money for a top-notch casting director, because he says they have the relationships that can really help you get good actors for your film, and I think that ultimately makes your film better. They say so much of films is casting, and so he's right, and I guess it seems obvious, but I've never heard somebody highlight it in that way, and I thought that was really a neat detail. Okay, commentary 2, Isaac Hayes and William Lustig, just a fun hangout track. Both gents definitely have some fun stories to talk about in terms of the movie. The next feature is a Fire Stunts 10-minute featurette, and that's a really great track, and I won't spoil what they're talking about, but there's a great couple fire stunts at the end of the movie that they go into detail about, with the second unit director, Spiro Razatos, talking through, and I really enjoyed it, just seeing how they did it. Because there's one stunt where I'm like, I don't even understand how you did that. Then there's a deleted scene that's sort of a pervy short gag, and or the gag reel is sort of a short gag, and the deleted scene is just like something where the guy says, there really wasn't much we could do with what was left of his face. That's kind of the scene. So anyway, very nice 4K from Blue Underground. And lastly, The Brain from Planet AROUS from 1957. This is one of those cheesy 1950s sci-fi films that's pretty much a fun time to watch, and was produced on a low budget, which may have contributed to it falling into sort of a quasi public domain-y kind of space in terms of the releases that it's gotten. I think this is the Blu-ray debut, and it's never looked particularly great on DVD. It's on Blu-ray. It's on YouTube. It doesn't look great there. And while I can't find a specific description of the restoration, they do seem to tout it as a digital restoration of some kind, and it looks good. And it's presented here in 2 aspect ratios, full frame 1:33:1 and the original 1:8:5. I will quickly note that in watching the 1:33, this will make sense. Obviously, the 1:8:5 is zoomed in, so it's a little grainier. So I preferred to watch it in the 1:33, even though it's not the original aspect ratio. So that's that. It stars John Agar as a nuclear physicist who turns on his Geiger counter, and it's going crazy, and he points out the window and says the radiation must be coming from this place called Mystery Mountain in the distance. And he goes to the mountain with his buddy, played by, I think, Robert Fuller, into a cave filmed at Bronson Canyons, and they find this disembodied brain with floating brain with eyes We've seen this like really low budget looking sort of alien craft, which is just like a spot of light during the credits hitting the mountain. And so then the brain sort of takes him over and possesses him and makes him develop silver eyes, which are these contacts that John Agar had to wear. He said they were really uncomfortable. And he can shoot lasers out of them. He shoots down airplanes while laughing. And the alien is really attracted to his wife, played by Jane Meadows, who's very involved in this release. And then another disembodied brain comes to the Earth and takes over his dog and battles him. And I'm not going to go too far into it, but it's fun and cheesy if you're into this kind of movie. I really think Film Detective has done a lot of great releases like this. John Agar starred in tons of sci-fi films. Revenge of the Creature, the second Creature from Black Lagoon movie, Tarantula, The Mole People, Invisible Invaders, Attack of the Puppet People. Did some stuff with John Wayne, and he's in Miracle Mile even. So it's a really fun movie. Joyce Meadows is good, and like I said, I'll talk about her more in a second. So it has some nice features, as they often do with these releases from Film Detective. Commentary by film historian Tom Weaver, which incorporates Larry Blameyer, actor Joyce Meadows, and musicologist David Schechter, who takes over the track for an extended sequence and just talks about the score. And it includes clips and talks about all kinds of background stuff and production, the production itself, the actors, producers, other films they made, and locations like Bronson Canyon. He has interview quotes from actors like Robert Fuller, the producers. He's got a great story from producer, cinematographer Jack Marquette, and others. And sometimes he has other people voice those quotes, so it distinctifies it from his own voice. And then he cuts in clips of an interview with Joyce Meadows, and it makes the whole thing feel like a nice audio documentary or podcast. Just very flowing, free, and works well. Very enjoyable and informative stuff. Tom Weaver's done tons of commentaries. He's an old pro. He's worked on Universal movies and stuff, and I'm a big fan of him as a special features guy. This track was great, just really well produced. There is an interview called Not the Same Old Brain, an introduction, not an interview, but an introduction by actor and star Joyce Meadows, who plays Agar's wife in the film Sally. It's about 11 minutes and 40 seconds. It's pretty fun because it starts with her in character at the base of Mystery Mountain, the actual location, and they film most of it, I think, out there. And then she goes into herself, talking, but it's somewhat scripted and it's cheeky and silly, and she's a great sport. But she's always still talking about how happy she is with the film coming out in this restored edition, and really enjoyable little introduction. As a supplement to that, I recommend the Important Cinema Club podcast did an interview that Will Sloan conducted with Joyce Meadows just recently, and it's about 30 minutes or so, and it's a delightful interview. She talks about her history with acting and this film memories, and John Agar, who I guess was an ex-boyfriend of hers, and I totally enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it. Even if you don't check out this Blu-ray, definitely check that out. Then you have a couple featurettes. You have The Man Before the Brain, director Nathan Duran. He's credited differently in here. He's credited as like Nathan, I forget what his middle name is, but he uses his middle name instead. And this one is voiced over by film historian Justin Humphreys as he talks us through the beginnings of director Nathan Duran and his history in films prior to The Brain from Planet AROUS. That's about 11 minutes, 42 seconds. And then we have The Man Behind the Brain, The World of Nathan Duran, 14 minutes. This includes an on-camera interview with author and film historian C. Courtney Joyner, talking about Nathan Duran as a director of fantasy films like Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, Deadly Manus, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Jack the Giant Killer, First Men on the Moon, but also his history as an art director, working on lots of big Hollywood films for the likes of Anthony Mann, Robert Siodmak, and others, things like Winchester 73 and Harvey, and how it's interesting that starting that way and the directing gig that he ends up getting because a director dropped out of a sort of a low-budget horror film put him on the path to hook up with producer Charles Schneer, who, of course, worked with Ray Harryhausen, and then he did a lot of that type of stuff and became this big fantasy director. So it's a great interview with Courtney Joyner, who's just a wonderful dude for this kind of material. Comes with a nice little booklet with a little essay in it. It is The Brains Behind the Brain, Sci-Fi Career of Producer Jacques Marquette. This is by Tom Weaver. I'll just read the opening paragraph. After the end of World War II, the popularity of sci-fi fantasy magazines soared with the speed of the spaceships described in the short stories that filled their pulp paper pages. In the pre-war years, there were 7 such magazines in America by 1951. There were more than 30, not to mention the many mimeograph fanzines. The reader of their out-of-this-world yarns ranged from professors, physicists, and electronics engineers who gravitated to the thought-provoking tales to juveniles who enjoyed the Western stories set in space with the spaceships and ray guns replacing horses and shooting irons. And it's a really nice, extensive little essay. So Tom Weaver really has done a lot for this release, and it's a wonderful release, and I highly recommend it. That's Brain from Planet AROUS. So it's Edge of Sanity, Uncle Sam, Brain from Planet AROUS. I actually forgot to mention that Edge of Sanity has a nice booklet as well with a wonderful essay by John Towson. So I highly recommend checking out the booklet in that one as well. Anyway, that will do it for this week's show. Hopefully there's something in here for you to check out if you're a sci-fi or horror fan. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.